In only the second race of the season, NASCAR found itself embroiled in the second controversy of the season after the Atlanta Cup Series race. Notice the pattern? However, this time NASCAR has broken its silence and dropped a bomb on the drivers just before COTA. Way to complicate things, right? Are we on track for controversy number 3 this weekend? So, this week on Hauler Talk, the Managing Director and Senior Director of Racing Communications returned to clarify the contentious call made during last week's Cup Series race. This week, Managing Director Mike Ford and Senior Director Amanda Ellis discussed what happened in Atlanta and the significant difference between Saturday night and Sunday. So, we're talking about it again, Ford added. So, we let it go green on Saturday evening in the Xfinity race. Once that happened, a chain of communication really took place between NASCAR competition and the industry on how we should look at the last lap and if there's a wreck. Amanda Ellis shared her perspective on the weekend. She was in race control, watching the Xfinity Series race as it ended. Yeah, and I will say, as you mentioned, I was in race control. End of a race moves very quickly, Ellis said. When we had Austin Hill cross the finish line, you knew you had a wreck as well. There's a lot of moving parts that really kick into play and start taking place. We're dispatching equipment. We're also trying to capture the field. You're trying to bring the field down pit road, then you move into a technical inspection. So, there's just a lot of things that are happening in those moments. And honestly, I'm not afraid to admit, I didn't think that last lap wreck was that bad. I recognize watching the replays and kind of seeing some of the vantage points we have in hindsight. I do understand why we feel like we should have thrown the caution, and we said that's on us. But in the first few moments after that, I didn't necessarily think it was that bad because I knew we were able to dispatch the equipment on the backstretch to make sure we got to the drivers and things like that. However, looking at the replays, we now see some other things that we're not comfortable with. Ellis went on to say that there was a flood of calls, texts, and messages from drivers and teams afterward. Not only the Xfinity Series, but also the Cup Series, were wondering what would happen the next day in their race. The input from drivers, as well as the replays, convinced NASCAR that they had made a mistake. It is good if NASCAR is saying, we're going to throw the caution for safety. Last lap or not, driver safety has to be a top priority. While it is nice to have Hauler Talk every week, I do have one complaint. This is the second week in a row that NASCAR has admitted to making a mistake to begin the season. Whether it was calling a caution in the Duel 2 race or not in the Atlanta Xfinity Series event, or calling it during the Cup Series race whilst it might not have been warranted. I believe that opening the year with Daytona and Atlanta back-to-back is a smart idea. It provides incredibly interesting racing for casual and new fans. With 2 drafting tracks to begin the season, consistent officiating is not too much to ask. NASCAR makes compelling arguments. Driver safety is really crucial, but 2 weeks into the year, it already feels like a pattern is emerging. Coming to the correct conclusion, but 2 days too late. And now we're ready for COTA, where strange things could happen again. So, will they do it correctly this time? The fundamental question is, when is a last lap wreck enough to cause a race-ending caution? It's a question that has dogged NASCAR's race control during the opening 2 weeks of the 2025 season. In the first 2 races of the 2025 season, NASCAR's race control has struggled to determine when a wreck justifies a race-ending yellow flag. However, to understand why it has been so tough to respond, we must go back before this year's Daytona 500 began. NASCAR's sanctioning body has traditionally issued last-lap cautions in the event of a significant incident, regardless of the circumstances. However, that posture would alter once it came under criticism at the end of the second dual qualifying race. Austin Cindric and Eric Jones were side by side in what was going to be a picture finish after some cars crashed in the middle of the pack. The field was only seconds away from the finish line, and due to the timing of the caution, Cindric was named the winner, despite Jones being ahead of him at the finish line. It was an unpleasant few minutes as Jones, believing he had won, pumped his fist and parked on the front stretch while Cindric returned to the pits. The question was clear. What difference did that caution make when the crash happened right before the start-finish line? Most people agreed that the yellow didn't change much because of how close the pack was to the finish line, other than who won the race. Due to rising criticism, NASCAR conceded that the caution call was incorrect and adopted a more relaxed approach to last-lap events for the remainder of the weekend. This strategy astounded and startled many, since the Daytona 500 remained green when the 5 race leaders all wrecked, spinning violently in front of the pack on the penultimate lap. NASCAR continued this stance into last weekend's race at Atlanta, allowing the field to race back while numerous cars collided violently on the backstretch during the Xfinity race. This sparked fresh criticism, this time from drivers who were upset that automobiles were driving dangerously through an accident scene, while others who lifted lost numerous positions. NASCAR admitted to making a mistake and changed its viewpoint yet again. If an occurrence like that occurred at the finish of the Cup race the next day, they announced that a caution would be issued. As fate would have it, that was exactly what happened. Josh Berry spun on the backstretch toward the end of the Cup race, crashing into many other cars. NASCAR issued a caution, but sadly, it denied those watching another historic finish. The leaders were racing 3 wide through the final corner, but the yellow flag prevented a picture finish this time. Naturally, fans were outraged, and the issue of safety versus entertainment rose to the center of the discourse. The issue they face is this: throwing the caution will undoubtedly damage certain finishes, but not throwing it may jeopardize the safety of the drivers on the circuit. And the sanctioning did themselves a favor by switching positions so frequently over the last 2 weeks, producing more confusion and a lack of clarity, regardless of where they ultimately end. However, they did themselves a harm by overcorrecting from duels to Atlanta. There is no case in which the caution at the end of the dual qualifying race improved safety. Speaking only for superspeedways, NASCAR should not issue a caution for a wreck that occurs between the exit of Turn 4 and the start-finish line. They should also not force drivers to floor it through an incident on the backstretch in order to avoid losing many positions and important points. A spin in the rear is not a race-ending caution, but the leaders crashing in front of the field on the backstretch most certainly is, and there is no cause for a yellow until the checkered flag is in sight. That represents the best of both worlds. NASCAR is not alone in attempting to assure a green flag finish, often at their own expense. In recent years, the Indianapolis 500 has used red flags to ensure there are enough laps to finish under green, since IndyCar does not have overtime rules. Marcus Ericsson slammed race control, forcing a one-lap dash to decide the 2023 Indy 500, leaving him a sitting duck up front. And of course, Formula One famously violated its own rules by allowing the 2021 title decider in Abu Dhabi to go back green for a one-lap dash to decide the World Championship in a race finish that people are still talking about. But is there anything else NASCAR can do? Some have suggested allowing last-lap cautions to merely push the race into another overtime restart, but I would strongly advise against it. NASCAR applied such a rule during the 2022 All-Star race, resulting in a questionable caution just as Ryan Blaney was about to take the checkered flag. The yellow came so late that he assumed the race was done and even removed his window net. He had to physically hold it up while fending off the field for one more restart. Allowing for subjective calls at the end feels like closing one Pandora's box only to unlock another. The truth is that some races will end with caution. There's no avoiding it. And sure, it is terrible. But NASCAR can absolutely handle it better than they have in the previous 2 weeks. To be honest, the Cup race in Atlanta was extremely tough for race control because the leaders were 3 wide as a collision occurred in the middle of the pack. And perhaps there is another option in certain situations. A caution that freezes the field behind the race leaders or around the accident scene, allowing those in front to settle the battle for the win organically, while cars in 20th don't have to plow through a wreck to finish 15th. And no matter which course they choose, we simply need consistency, which NASCAR has historically lacked when making some of these decisions. Too often, we witness Elton Sawyer, Senior VP of Competition, explaining race control choices in a post-race media scrum. Too often, spectators leave race finishes dissatisfied and confused. While it would be good if drivers could avoid smashing into each other one lap before the checkered flag, NASCAR needs to be better prepared to deal with these extremely fluid scenarios. Every wreck is unique, and they won't always get it right. But NASCAR must be able to make decisions on the fly that are acceptable to the majority of drivers and fans. Clear processes for what is and is not caution-worthy must be implemented, and most importantly, consistency is required, or they risk losing the faith of people watching every Sunday.